My son's wife mocked me in Japanese in front of everyone. With disdain, she said, "That poor, tacky old woman shouldn't be here today." So stupid. I smiled, adjusted my dress, and said 3 words in Japanese that made her go completely pale. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have known something was wrong the moment Avalon greeted me at the door of her parents' mansion. Her smile was too wide, too practiced, like she was putting on a show for an audience I couldn't see yet. "Winifred, you made it," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She looked me up and down, taking in my simple navy dress and modest jewelry. How quaint. My son Marcus appeared behind her, adjusting his tie nervously. At 32, he still had that eager-to-please expression he'd worn as a child, but now it was directed entirely at his fiancée rather than his mother. "Mom, you look nice," he said, though his eyes darted to Avalon for approval, even as he spoke. "Thank you, sweetheart." I handed him a small gift bag. "Just a little something for the happy couple." Avalon's eyes narrowed slightly as she peeked inside. It was a handmade ceramic vase I'd found at a local craft fair. Simple, elegant, but clearly not expensive. I watched her expression shift to barely concealed disdain. "How thoughtful," she said, setting it aside carelessly. Come in. My parents are so excited to meet you." The Tanaka family home was everything I'd expected from Marcus's descriptions. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and artwork that probably cost more than I made in a year. But it was the people that made me feel truly out of place. Avalon's parents, Kenneth and Miyuki Tanaka, stood in the living room like royalty holding court. Kenneth was tall and distinguished in his perfectly tailored suit, while Miyuki wore an elegant silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They both looked at me with polite curiosity, the kind reserved for interesting specimens rather than future family members. "Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka," I said, extending my hand. "Thank you so much for having me." "Please call us Kenneth and Miyuki," Kenneth said with a practiced smile. "We've heard so much about you." I wondered what exactly they'd heard, given the way Miyuki's eyes swept over my appearance with thinly veiled disappointment. The evening progressed with painful politeness. During cocktails, I found myself relegated to the corner while the Tanakas discussed their recent trip to their villa in Aspen and their son's promotion at his tech startup. Avalon played the perfect hostess, gliding between conversations in her designer dress, making sure everyone knew exactly how successful and cultured her family was. "Marcus tells us you work at the library," Miyuki said when the conversation finally turned to me. "Yes, I'm a part-time assistant. It's quiet work, but I enjoy it." Kenneth nodded absently. "That's nice. Very. Stable." The way he said stable made it sound like a consolation prize. Dinner was an elaborate affair with multiple courses and wines I couldn't pronounce. I did my best to keep up with the conversation about art galleries and charity galas, but I felt increasingly invisible. Avalon made sure of that. "Oh, Winifred," she said during the main course, her voice bright with false concern. "I hope the portions aren't too small for you. I know you're probably used to more substantial meals." I felt my cheeks burn but managed to smile. "Everything is delicious, thank you." "Good. I was worried you might not be comfortable with Japanese cuisine. It can be quite refined for some palates." Marcus squeezed my hand under the table, but he didn't defend me. He never did anymore. As dessert was served, the conversation turned to the upcoming wedding plans. Avalon described their vision for a ceremony at an exclusive country club, followed by a honeymoon in Kyoto. "We want to honor my family's heritage," she explained, though I noticed she'd been speaking English all evening, despite her parents occasionally lapsing into Japanese with each other. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Japan must be beautiful." Avalon exchanged a look with her parents, and I saw something shift in the air. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Actually, we were discussing the guest list earlier," he said carefully. "We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable at such a formal event." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming. "The thing is," Avalon continued, her voice taking on a tone of regretful concern. Some of our guests are quite particular about social etiquette. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place. Marcus shifted uncomfortably beside me. Avalon, what are you saying? She reached over and patted his hand condescendingly. Darling, I'm just thinking of your mother's comfort. Maybe she'd prefer a smaller, more intimate celebration afterward? Something more suited to her lifestyle? The silence that followed was deafening. I felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could all hear it. Before I could respond, Avalon leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile and said something in Japanese to her parents. Her tone was casual, conversational, as if she was commenting on the weather. Kono binbo de dasai rojin wa kyokoko ni irubeki de wa arimasen. Honto ni baka desu. Kenneth and Miyuki looked uncomfortable, glancing between their daughter and me, but they said nothing. Marcus, of course, had no idea what had been said. I felt something cold settle in my chest. After 65 years on this earth, after everything I'd been through, I thought I was past caring about the opinions of people like this. But sitting there, being dismissed and mocked in a language they assumed I couldn't understand, I felt smaller than I had in decades. Slowly, I reached for my napkin and dabbed at the corners of my mouth. Then I set it down, adjusted my simple dress, and looked directly at Avalon. Anata wa machigate imasu, I said quietly. The effect was instantaneous. Avalon's face went completely white. Kenneth dropped his fork with a clatter. Miyuki's eyes widened in shock. Marcus looked around the table in confusion. What just happened? I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than they'd been all evening. For the first time since I'd walked into this house, I felt completely calm. Thank you for dinner, I said to Kenneth and Miyuki, my voice perfectly composed. It was very enlightening. Avalon was still staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I picked up my purse and looked at my son. Marcus, I'll talk to you later. As I walked toward the door, I could hear frantic whispers in Japanese behind me, but I didn't look back. I'd spent too many years looking back. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Behind me, I could hear raised voices and what sounded like a door slamming. I smiled to myself as I got into my modest Honda Civic. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to find out. Marcus called me at 7:30 the next morning, his voice tight with anger I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. Mom, what the hell did you do last night? I was sitting in my small kitchen, nursing my second cup of coffee and watching the sun rise through my window. After 20 years of early morning shifts at various jobs, I still woke up before dawn, even though I only worked part-time now. I said goodbye and left, Marcus, just like any polite dinner guest would. Don't play dumb with me. Avalon is devastated. Her parents are furious. You said something in Japanese that upset everyone. I set down my coffee cup carefully. Did she tell you what she said to me in Japanese first? There was a pause. What are you talking about? Ask her, Marcus. Ask your fiancé what she called your mother in front of her own parents. You're being ridiculous. Avalon doesn't speak Japanese that well. She was probably just trying to include her parents in the conversation. The naive certainty in his voice broke my heart. This was my son, the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and bad dreams. Now he couldn't see the manipulation happening right in front of his face. Marcus, she called me a poor, tacky old woman who didn't belong there. She said I was stupid. That's impossible. You don't even speak Japanese. The words hung in the air between us. He was right, as far as he knew. I'd never told him about those 8 years in Tokyo, about the life I'd built and lost there. To Marcus, I was just his working-class mother who'd raised him alone after his father left when he was 5. Why would you believe that Avalon would say something so cruel? I asked instead. Because she wouldn't. She's not like that, Mom. You don't understand her world. You don't understand how hard this is for her. Bringing someone from a different background into her family. A different background. I repeated his words slowly. Is that what she calls it? Look, I know last night was awkward. The Tanakas are very traditional, very formal. Avalon was probably just nervous about making a good impression. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. Over the past 2 years, ever since Marcus had started dating Avalon, our relationship had shifted. She had a way of making him see me as an embarrassment, a burden he needed to manage. It started small. Marcus began declining my invitations to dinner because Avalon had planned something else. He stopped calling me on Sundays, our traditional check-in day, because weekends were for couple time. When I did see him, he'd make subtle suggestions about my appearance, my apartment, my job. Maybe you could update your wardrobe a bit, Mom. There are some great discount stores that carry more modern styles. Have you thought about moving to a nicer neighborhood? Avalon's concerned about you living alone in that area. You know, the library job is fine, but maybe you could look into something with better benefits. Avalon knows someone in HR at her father's company. Each suggestion was delivered with love and concern, but I could hear Avalon's voice behind every word. She was slowly but systematically rewriting the narrative of who I was in my son's eyes. "Marcus," I said now, choosing my words carefully, "do you remember when you were 12 and broke Mrs. Patterson's window with your baseball? What does that have to do with anything? You were so scared to tell me. You thought I'd be angry, maybe even send you away like your father did. But what did I do?" A long silence. "You helped me figure out how to pay for it with my allowance. We went to her house together so I could apologize. And what did I tell you about taking responsibility for your actions? That running away from problems only makes them worse." His voice was quieter now. "I'm not running away from anything, son. But I need you to really look at what's happening here. When was the last time Avalon said something kind about me? When was the last time she encouraged you to spend time with your mother?" Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was conflicted. "She's just protective of our relationship. Her last boyfriend's mother was really intrusive, always calling and dropping by unannounced. She doesn't want that dynamic with us. When have I ever been intrusive, Marcus?" The silence stretched longer this time, because the truth was, I'd been the opposite. I'd given him space when he went to college, even when I missed him terribly. I'd supported his career choices even when they took him further away from me. I'd welcomed Avalon with open arms, even when every instinct told me she was trouble. "It's complicated, Mom." "No, it's not. Either she respects your family or she doesn't. There's nothing complicated about basic human decency. You don't understand the pressure she's under. Her family has very high expectations. Her father is the CEO of 3 companies. Her mother serves on the boards of 5 different charities. They move in circles where image matters." "And where exactly do I fit into that image, Marcus?" He didn't answer right away, and in that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. "Maybe," he started, then stopped. "Maybe you could try to meet her halfway. Dress up a little more when we go out. Learn about wine and art. Show interest in the things that matter to her." My heart broke a little more. The things that matter to her. What about the things that matter to you? What about the woman who raised you? "That's not fair. Of course you matter to me." "Do I?" Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you're asking me to become someone else entirely, just to make your fiancé comfortable. "I'm asking you to make an effort." The words exploded out of him, and I could hear years of frustration behind them. This was what Avalon had been building toward, making him see me as the problem, the obstacle to his happiness. "I've been making an effort for 2 years, Marcus. I've bitten my tongue when she's been rude to me. I've pretended not to notice when she rolls her eyes at my stories or changes the subject when I speak. I've smiled and nodded when she talks about how different our backgrounds are, like being working class is some kind of moral failing. She's never said that. She doesn't have to say it directly. It's in every look, every sigh, every suggestion that I need to change something about myself. And now you're doing it too." I heard him take a shaky breath. "I just want everyone to get along." "No, Marcus. You want me to disappear quietly so your new life can be perfect. But that's not going to happen. What's that supposed to mean?" I stood up and walked to my bedroom, where a small box sat on my dresser. Inside were photos and documents I hadn't looked at in years. My passport with stamps from Narita Airport, business cards in Japanese and English, a letter of recommendation from the CEO of Yamamoto Industries. It means your mother isn't the simple library assistant you think she is, and your fiancé made a very big mistake last night. Mom, you're scaring me. Good. Maybe it's time you started asking better questions. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in 2 years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. My own power. Avalon thought she could humiliate me with her superiority, and her languages, and her family's money. She thought I was just another obstacle to remove from Marcus's path. She had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to learn. After hanging up with Marcus, I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a long time, staring at the box I'd pulled from my dresser. 23 years had passed since I'd last opened it, and my fingers trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a photograph of myself at 38, standing in front of the Tokyo office building where I'd worked for 8 years. I was wearing a sharp business suit, my hair pulled back in a professional chignon, my smile confident and bright. I looked like a completely different person from the woman Avalon had dismissed last night, because I had been a different person then. I pulled out my old business cards, the Japanese characters as familiar to me as my own name. Winifred Morrison, Senior Translation Coordinator, Yamamoto Industries. Below that, the same title in perfect Japanese script. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Avalon had struggled through basic phrases at dinner, calling me stupid in broken Japanese, I had once conducted board meetings in the language. I had negotiated million-dollar contracts, translated complex legal documents, and earned the respect of some of Tokyo's most powerful business leaders. But that life felt like a dream now, something that had happened to someone else. I had never planned to move to Japan. When Marcus's father, David, walked out on us, I was 30 years old with a 5-year-old son and no college degree. David had been the one with ambitions, the one who was supposed to provide stability while I stayed home with the baby. His leaving shattered more than just my heart. It destroyed every plan I'd made for our future. For 3 years after the divorce, I worked multiple jobs just to keep us afloat. I cleaned office buildings at night, worked at a diner during the day, and took in sewing on weekends. Marcus spent more time with babysitters than with me, and the guilt was eating me alive. Then I met Hiroshi Nakamura. He was in San Francisco on business, working for a Japanese manufacturing company that was expanding into the American market. I was waitressing at the hotel restaurant where he was staying, and he came in every morning for coffee and toast, always sitting at the same table by the window. Hiroshi was nothing like David. He was quiet, thoughtful, and incredibly kind. He tipped generously and always said, "Please and thank you," even when my service was rushed and distracted. After a week, he started asking me about my life, and I found myself telling him things I'd never shared with anyone. "You are very intelligent," he said one morning, his English careful but precise. "Why do you work so many jobs?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because intelligent doesn't pay the bills." "In Japan," he said slowly, "companies value people who can speak both languages, English and Japanese. It is very important for business." I thought he was just being polite, but the next day he brought me a book, Japanese for Business Professionals, and a note written in both English and Japanese. "If you are serious about learning," the note said, "I would be honored to help you." I should have said no. I should have been practical, focused on the jobs I already had. But something about Hiroshi's quiet confidence made me believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be more than I was. For the next 6 months, while he finished his business in San Francisco, Hiroshi tutored me 3 times a week after my evening shift. Marcus would fall asleep on the restaurant booth while we worked through grammar exercises and pronunciation drills. Hiroshi was patient, encouraging, and never made me feel stupid when I struggled with the complex writing systems. When his assignment ended, he asked me something that changed my life forever. "Yamamoto Industries needs American liaisons in Tokyo," he said. "People who understand both cultures, both languages. The pay would be enough to support you and Marcus comfortably." I stared at him. "You're asking me to move to Japan?" I am offering you a chance at a different life, for you and your son. The decision should have been impossible. I didn't know anyone in Japan except Hiroshi. I'd never been further from home than Los Angeles, but I looked at Marcus, who was falling asleep over his coloring book while I worked my third job of the day, and I knew I had to try. 3 months later, we were on a plane to Tokyo. The first year was brutal. Despite my studies with Hiroshi, I was overwhelmed by the language, the culture, the expectations. Marcus struggled in his international school, missing his friends and complaining about the food. I questioned my decision daily, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But gradually, things began to change. My Japanese improved rapidly when I was immersed in it daily. I discovered I had a natural talent for translation, particularly in business contexts where precision was critical. My colleagues at Yamamoto began to respect my work, and my salary increased accordingly. Marcus adapted too, faster than I did. Children are resilient, and soon he was chattering away in Japanese with his classmates, bringing home art projects featuring anime characters and traditional Japanese festivals. By our third year in Tokyo, I had been promoted to senior translation coordinator. I was handling communications for major international deals, traveling to Singapore and Hong Kong for conferences, earning more money than I'd ever dreamed possible. And I was falling in love with Hiroshi. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. He had been my guide into Japanese culture, but more than that, he had seen potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. He believed I could succeed in a world that had seemed impossible to reach. We married in my 5th year in Japan, in a beautiful ceremony that blended American and Japanese traditions. Marcus, then 13, walked me down the aisle, proud and handsome in his formal wear. For the first time since David had left, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. For 3 years, we were happy. Hiroshi and I bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood outside Tokyo. Marcus was thriving in school, completely bilingual and culturally adaptable. I was respected at work, financially secure, and deeply in love. Then, everything fell apart. Hiroshi was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on a rainy Tuesday in March. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 4. I remember sitting by his hospital bed, holding his hand while he slept, wondering how my world could crumble so completely twice in one lifetime. Marcus was 16 then, devastated by the loss of the only father figure he'd ever known. "You should go home," Hiroshi had whispered to me the week before he died. "Take Marcus home to America. Let him finish school where he understands everything perfectly." "This is home," I'd protested. "Your home." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Home is where Marcus can build his future, where you can both heal." After the funeral, I tried to stay. I threw myself into work, convinced that if I just kept moving forward, the grief would become manageable. But Marcus was struggling, caught between childhood and adulthood in a country that suddenly felt foreign without Hiroshi's guiding presence. 6 months after Hiroshi died, I made the second hardest decision of my life. I resigned from my position, sold our house, and moved back to California with Marcus. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we got back on our feet. But life has a way of making temporary decisions permanent. Marcus needed stability to finish high school and apply to colleges. I needed to rebuild our lives from scratch in a country that now felt almost as foreign as Japan had initially seemed. I took the first job I could find, shelving books at the local library. It was quiet, undemanding work that allowed me to be available when Marcus needed me. The pay was a fraction of what I'd earned in Tokyo, but it was enough for our modest apartment and simple lifestyle. I never intended to hide my past from Marcus, but as months turned into years, it became easier to let him see me as just his mother who worked at the library. Talking about Tokyo meant talking about Hiroshi, and that grief was still too raw, too complicated to share. Marcus went to college, built his career, and eventually met Avalon. And somewhere along the way, I became the woman she saw last night. Quiet, humble, unremarkable. But that woman was only part of who I was. I pulled out the last item from the box. A letter of recommendation from the CEO of Yamamoto Industries, written when I'd resigned. It was in both Japanese and English, praising my professionalism, my cultural sensitivity, and my exceptional ability to bridge communication gaps between diverse business communities. I read it twice, remembering the woman who had earned those words. She was still inside me, buried under years of modest living and deliberate invisibility. Avalon thought she could dismiss me as an ignorant old woman who didn't belong in her world. She had no idea that I'd once moved confidently through boardrooms in Tokyo, that I'd been respected by executives who controlled billions of dollars in international trade. She was about to learn that underestimating people was a dangerous game, especially when you didn't know who you were really playing against. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, I sat in my apartment with my old address book open on the kitchen table. The names and numbers were written in a mixture of English and Japanese, contacts I hadn't used in over 20 years. My finger traced down the page until I found what I was looking for. Kenji Matsumoto, former colleague and one of the few people from my Tokyo days who had kept in touch. Kenji now ran his own international consulting firm, specializing in Japanese-American business relations. We exchanged Christmas cards every year, brief updates on our lives, but I hadn't spoken to him directly since Hiroshi's funeral. I picked up my phone, then set it down again. What I was about to do felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But Avalon had crossed a line first when she decided to humiliate me in front of her family. The phone rang 4 times before Kenji's familiar voice answered. Matsumoto Consulting, Kenji speaking. Kenji, it's Winifred Morrison. Winifred Nakamura, actually, when you knew me. There was a pause. Then genuine warmth flooded his voice. Winifred. My goodness, it's been so long. How are you? How is Marcus? I'm well, and Marcus is. Complicated. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor, and I need you to keep it confidential. Kenji had always been discreet, one of the reasons he'd been so successful in business. Of course. What can I do for you? I need information about a family. The Tanakas. Kenneth Tanaka runs several companies here in California, and his wife Miyuki serves on charity boards. Their daughter is engaged to my son. Ah, Kenji's tone shifted slightly, becoming more professional. What kind of information are you looking for? I hesitated. In my old life, this would have been a routine business inquiry. But asking for personal information about my son's future in-laws felt like a betrayal of sorts. Financial stability, business reputation, anything that might affect my son's future. I understand. Let me make some calls. I'll be discreet, just routine business networking inquiries. Can you give me 48 hours? That's perfect. And Kenji? Thank you. Winifred, he said gently. Are you in some kind of trouble? I thought about how to answer that. Not trouble, exactly. But I have a feeling I'm about to be. After I hung up, I spent the rest of the day trying to act normal. I went to work at the library, helping patrons find books and processing returns. But my mind kept wandering to the conversation I'd had with Marcus, to the look on Avalon's face when I'd responded in Japanese, to the uncomfortable silence from her parents. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old Japanese textbooks and spent 2 hours reviewing business terminology and formal expressions. My pronunciation was rusty, but the grammar came back surprisingly quickly. Language is like muscle memory. Once you truly learn it, it never completely leaves you. The next day dragged by. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, waiting for Kenji's call. When it finally came, I was reorganizing the children's section for the 3rd time. I can't talk long, I told him, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. What did you find? Interesting family, Kenji said, and something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Kenneth Tanaka's companies are successful, but they're heavily leveraged. He's expanded aggressively over the past 5 years, taking on significant debt to finance acquisitions. Is that necessarily bad? Not if the expansion continues to pay off. But there are rumors that 2 of his major contracts may not be renewed next year. If that happens, he could be in serious financial trouble. I felt a chill run down my spine. How serious? Bankruptcy serious. He's personally guaranteed most of the corporate debt. If the companies fail, He loses everything. The house, the investments, everything. What about Miyuki's charity work? Kenji chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Very impressive on paper, but I did some checking with my contacts in the nonprofit world. She serves on boards, yes, but she doesn't contribute much financially. Her participation seems to be more about social positioning than actual philanthropy. I closed my eyes, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And their daughter? Avalon Tanaka. 26 years old, graduated from USC with a degree in communications. No steady employment history, though she's listed as a consultant for her father's companies. From what I can tell, that means she gets paid for attending social functions and making connections. So she's financially dependent on her parents. Completely. And if her parents' financial situation collapses, she'll have nothing to fall back on. After Kenji hung up, I sat in the library break room, staring at my untouched lunch. Everything made sense now. Avalon's desperation to make a good impression at family dinners, her insistence on an expensive wedding at an exclusive venue, her systematic campaign to distance Marcus from me. She wasn't just marrying my son, she was securing her financial future, and I was the only potential obstacle to that plan. That evening, I called my old bank in Tokyo. It took several transfers and a lot of patient explaining, but eventually I was connected with someone who could help me access my account information. The money I'd earned during my years at Yamamoto Industries was still there, converted to American dollars and sitting in a high-yield savings account I'd forgotten about. $437,000. I stared at the balance on my computer screen, hardly believing what I was seeing. With compound interest over 23 years, my modest savings had grown into a substantial nest egg. I'd been living paycheck to paycheck for so long that I'd forgotten I had this safety net. More importantly, I'd forgotten that I wasn't the helpless woman Avalon thought she was manipulating. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Instead of going to the library, I drove to an upscale shopping center 30 minutes from my apartment. I hadn't been clothes shopping for anything other than necessity in years, but I still remembered how to dress for success. The saleswoman at Nordstrom looked skeptical when I walked in wearing my usual thrift store cardigan and discount store slacks. But when I explained what I needed, a complete wardrobe suitable for upscale social events, her attitude changed quickly. "Are you thinking more conservative professional or elegant evening wear?" she asked, leading me toward the designer section. "Both. I need to be prepared for any occasion." 3 hours later, I walked out with 2 bags full of carefully chosen pieces. A navy suit that fit perfectly and cost more than I used to make in a month. A cocktail dress in deep burgundy that made me look sophisticated rather than frumpy. Professional blouses and well-tailored slacks. Even new shoes and a handbag that coordinated with everything. The total was just over $3,000, more than I'd ever spent on clothes at one time. But as I looked at myself in the dressing room mirror, wearing the navy suit with my hair styled by the salon next door, I saw the woman I used to be looking back at me. I'd forgotten how it felt to look powerful. That afternoon, I made one more call to Japan. This time, I contacted the current CEO of Yamamoto Industries, a man named Takeshi Yamamoto, who had been a junior executive when I worked there. "Nakamura-san," he said when his assistant connected us. "What an honor to hear from you. I have often wondered what became of our most talented American colleague." "I'm calling about a business matter, Yamamoto-san. I need information about potential partners for a small consulting project I'm considering." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was consulting in a way. 20 minutes later, I had everything I needed to know about Kenneth Tanaka's business dealings. Yamamoto Industries had considered partnering with his company 2 years ago, but decided against it due to concerns about financial stability and aggressive expansion practices. "We felt he was too willing to take risks that could endanger his partners," Yamamoto explained. "Not a man we would trust with long-term relationships." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Avalon had made a crucial error. She'd assumed that because I worked at a library and lived modestly, I was powerless. She'd calculated that I could be dismissed and discarded without consequences. But she'd forgotten something important about assumptions. They only work when you have all the information. And she had no idea who I really was or what resources I had at my disposal. More importantly, she had no idea that I'd learned long ago how to play the game she thought she'd invented. The game was about to begin, and this time, I held all the cards. The engagement party invitation arrived 3 weeks later, printed on thick cream cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. Kenneth and Miyuki Tanaka request the pleasure of your company at a celebration honoring the engagement of their daughter Avalon to Marcus Morrison. I studied the invitation carefully. The venue was the Pacific Heights Country Club, one of the most exclusive establishments in the city. The dress code was listed as cocktail attire, which I now understood was code for dress expensively or don't come at all. Marcus called me that evening, his voice tentative. "Mom, did you get the invitation?" "I did. It's very elegant." "You're coming, right?" "I know things were tense at dinner, but Avalon really wants you there. She feels bad about how that evening ended." I almost laughed at the lie, but kept my voice neutral. "Of course I'll be there. I wouldn't miss celebrating your engagement." "Great. And Mom, maybe we could go shopping together for something to wear. I want you to feel comfortable." The offer was kind, but I could hear Avalon's influence behind it. She was still trying to control my appearance, to make sure I looked appropriately grateful for being included. "That's sweet of you, Marcus, but I've already taken care of it." "Oh, okay. Well, I'm sure whatever you choose will be perfect." I spent the next 2 weeks preparing, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of worrying about fitting in, I focused on gathering information. I researched every name on the guest list that Marcus had mentioned, learning about their businesses, their social connections, their interests. I practiced conversations in Japanese until my pronunciation was flawless. I even hired a language tutor for 3 sessions to polish my formal speaking skills. Most importantly, I made a few strategic phone calls. The night of the party, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, hardly recognizing the woman looking back at me. The burgundy cocktail dress fit perfectly, highlighting the figure I'd hidden under loose cardigans for years. My hair was professionally styled in an elegant updo, and I wore the pearl necklace Hiroshi had given me for our first anniversary, the only expensive jewelry I'd kept from my old life. I looked like someone who belonged at a country club. More than that, I looked like someone who commanded respect. The Pacific Heights Country Club was everything I'd expected. All marble and mahogany, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over perfectly dressed guests holding champagne flutes. The kind of place where conversations were conducted in careful whispers and everyone evaluated everyone else based on their clothes, their jewelry, their connections. I recognized several faces from the photos I'd researched, but I didn't rush to introduce myself. Instead, I moved through the room quietly, observing, listening, waiting for the right moment. Marcus found me near the bar, his eyes widening when he saw me. "Mom, you look incredible." "Thank you, sweetheart." I kissed his cheek, noticing how he seemed to stand a little straighter when people looked our way. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." Before he could lead me away, Avalon appeared at his side. She was wearing a white dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair cascading in perfect waves over her shoulders. She looked beautiful, confident, and completely in control of her domain. Until she saw me. Her smile faltered for just a moment, surprise flickering across her features. She'd expected the dowdy library worker, not the woman standing before her now. "Winifred," she said, recovering quickly. "How lovely that you could make it. You look very nice." The word nice was delivered with the faintest edge, a subtle reminder that while I might clean up well, I was still an outsider in her world. "Thank you, Avalon. You look radiant. Marriage suits you already." She preened at the compliment, missing the irony. "Marcus and I are so happy. We have so many wonderful plans for our future." "I'm sure you do. I'd love to hear about them." For the next hour, I played the role of interested future mother-in-law, asking appropriate questions and making appreciative comments about their wedding plans. The ceremony would cost $60,000. The reception would host 200 guests. The honeymoon in Kyoto would last 2 weeks and include stays at luxury ryokans. It sounds expensive, I commented mildly. Well, we want everything to be perfect, Avalon said, her tone suggesting that someone like me couldn't possibly understand such standards. Daddy always says you only get married once, so it should be memorable. I noticed she didn't mention who was paying for all this perfection. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with Kenneth and Miyuki Tanaka. They were polite but distant, treating me like a necessary obligation rather than a welcomed guest. Marcus tells us you work at the library, Miyuki said, her tone suggesting this was somehow quaint. Yes, I enjoy the quiet atmosphere. Very different from my previous career. Kenneth raised an eyebrow. Oh, what did you do before? International business consulting. I lived in Tokyo for 8 years, working primarily with Japanese corporations expanding into American markets. The change in their demeanor was immediate. Kenneth set down his drink, his full attention focused on me for the first time all evening. What kind of corporations? He asked. Manufacturing primarily. Automotive, electronics, some pharmaceutical work. I specialized in contract negotiations and cultural mediation. Miyuki leaned forward slightly. Your Japanese must be excellent. Hi, so desu. Bijinesu rebaru no nihongo o hanashimasu. The formal business Japanese rolled off my tongue effortlessly, and I watched their faces change as they realized I wasn't just making polite conversation. I was demonstrating fluency they hadn't expected. Which companies did you work with? Kenneth asked, his voice more respectful now. Yamamoto Industries was my primary employer, but I consulted for Mitsubishi, Honda, and several smaller firms. I imagine you know some of these companies through your own business dealings. Kenneth's face went pale. If he'd done any business in Japan, he would know that Yamamoto Industries was one of the most respected firms in the country. Working there for 8 years meant I'd held a position of significant responsibility. Yes, I've heard of Yamamoto, he stammered. Wonderful company. Very traditional, very thorough in their business practices. They taught me the importance of proper research before entering into any partnership. The word research hung in the air between us, and I saw Kenneth swallow hard. Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice called out from across the room. Winifred Nakamura! I cannot believe it. I turned to see Takeshi Yamamoto approaching, impeccably dressed and beaming with genuine pleasure. I'd called him 2 days ago, mentioning that I might be attending a social function where his presence would be helpful. Yamamoto-san, I said, bowing slightly in the traditional manner. What a pleasant surprise. The surprise is mine, he said, switching smoothly between Japanese and English as we spoke. I had no idea you were in San Francisco. Are you considering returning to consulting work? I'm exploring possibilities, I said carefully, aware that Kenneth and Miyuki were hanging on every word. Excellent. We have been expanding our California operations and could use someone with your expertise. The American market has become quite complex since you left us. As Takeshi and I continued our conversation, discussing mutual colleagues and market trends, I noticed a crowd gathering around us. Everyone wanted to meet the CEO of Yamamoto Industries, and by extension, they were taking a new interest in me, including Avalon, who had appeared at Kenneth's side looking confused and increasingly alarmed. Daddy, she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Who is that man? Takeshi Yamamoto, Kenneth said quietly, CEO of one of Japan's largest corporations. And why is he talking to Marcus's mother like they're old friends? Kenneth didn't answer, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was beginning to understand that he'd severely underestimated the woman he'd dismissed as a simple library worker. After Takeshi excused himself to mingle with other guests, I found myself surrounded by people who'd ignored me earlier in the evening. Suddenly everyone wanted to know about my time in Japan, my business experience, my connections in the international market. I answered their questions graciously, sharing carefully edited stories about my consulting work and the contracts I'd helped negotiate. With each anecdote, I watched Avalon's face grow more strained. Finally, she pulled me aside, her smile tight and forced. "I had no idea you had such an impressive background," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "You never asked." Marcus never mentioned it. Marcus doesn't know much about that part of my life. I've never seen the need to burden him with stories about the past. Avalon's eyes narrowed slightly. "But you're sharing those stories tonight." I met her gaze steadily. "You seem to think I needed to prove I belonged here. I was simply providing context." "I never said you didn't belong here. You didn't need to say it. Some things are communicated more clearly without words. Like when you called me a poor, tacky old woman in Japanese at your parents' dinner table." Avalon's face went white. Around us, the party continued, but I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized the implications of what I'd just said. You understood that? Every word. Just like I understand the financial pressure your family is under. Just like I understand why you're so eager to marry into stability. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you didn't know that Yamamoto Industries decided against partnering with your father's company 2 years ago due to concerns about financial stability and risky business practices. The color drained completely from her face. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I still have friends in Tokyo. Because when someone threatens my family, I make it my business to understand exactly who I'm dealing with." Avalon looked around desperately, as if searching for an escape route. "You can't. Marcus loves me. I'm sure he does. But love built on lies has a way of crumbling when the truth comes out." "What do you want?" "I want honesty, Avalon. I want respect. And I want you to understand that underestimating people based on their appearance is a dangerous game." I smiled, the same polite smile I'd worn all evening, and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of her own engagement party, finally understanding that she'd chosen the wrong opponent. The call came at 6 in the morning, 3 days after the engagement party. Marcus's voice was strained, exhausted, like he'd been awake all night. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you come over?" "Of course. Are you all right?" "Just, please come over. Avalon's here too." I dressed carefully in one of my new outfits, the navy suit that made me feel like the professional I'd once been. Whatever was about to happen, I wanted to face it as the woman I truly was, not the diminished version I'd been pretending to be. Marcus's apartment was in chaos when I arrived. Moving boxes were scattered around the living room, and Avalon sat on the couch with red-rimmed eyes, her perfect composure finally cracked. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already suspected. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was struggling with something difficult. After the party, Avalon's father got a call from some potential business partners in Japan. They canceled 2 major contracts, said they'd heard concerning things about the company's stability. I sat down slowly, keeping my expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" Avalon's voice was sharp with accusation. "Because it seems awfully coincidental that this happened right after you had your little reunion with that Japanese executive." Marcus looked between us, confusion clear on his face. "What is she talking about, Mom?" I took a deep breath. It was time for the truth, all of it. 3 weeks ago, I asked a former colleague to do some research on the Tanaka family's financial situation. What I discovered was that Kenneth's companies are heavily leveraged and facing serious financial difficulties. When I mentioned this to Takeshi Yamamoto at the party, he felt obligated to share that information with his business associates who were considering partnerships with Kenneth. "You sabotaged my family," Avalon said, her voice rising. "I protected mine." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I don't understand any of this." "Mom, who is Takeshi Yamamoto? How do you know him?" So I told him everything, about the 8 years in Tokyo, about Hiroshi, about the career I'd built and the life I'd left behind, about the woman I'd been before I became just his mother who worked at the library. Marcus listened in stunned silence as I described the boardrooms where I'd negotiated million-dollar deals, the respect I'd earned from some of Japan's most powerful executives, the financial independence I'd given up to come back and raise him. "You were wealthy," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was successful. I chose to live modestly here because I wanted to focus on being your mother, not impressing people with money. But you let me think. You let everyone think you were just. Just what, Marcus? Just a library worker? Just a simple woman who didn't understand the sophisticated world your fiancé moved in?" He sank into a chair, his face pale. "God, Mom! The things I said to you. The way I asked you to change, to try to fit in better. You said those things because Avalon convinced you that I was an embarrassment, that I wasn't good enough for her world." Avalon stood up abruptly, her composure finally shattering completely. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. My family was counting on this marriage. You needed my son's financial stability to save your family from bankruptcy," I said calmly. "I understand perfectly." Marcus looked at Avalon as if seeing her for the first time. "Is that true? Were you marrying me for money?" "No, I love you, but—" She stopped, realizing how her words sounded. "But what? But you also needed a financially stable husband because your father's companies are failing? It's not that simple." "Actually, it is that simple," I said. "You built a relationship on manipulation and lies. You systematically isolated Marcus from his family because you saw me as a threat to your plans. You underestimated me. And when I proved you wrong, you tried to destroy my son's relationship with me. I never tried to destroy anything. You told him I was embarrassing. You suggested he limit contact with me. You made him feel ashamed of his own mother because I didn't fit your image of what a proper family should look like." Marcus was staring at Avalon now, pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "That's true, isn't it? You did say those things." "Marcus, please, you have to understand." "Understand what? That you've been lying to me for 2 years? That you never wanted me to have a relationship with my mother?" The fight went out of Avalon all at once. She collapsed back onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. "I was scared. My family. We're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, everything. I thought if you could just marry into a stable situation, you'd be safe," I finished for her. "But you forgot something important, Avalon. Real relationships are built on truth, not strategy." Marcus stood up slowly, his decision clear on his face before he spoke. "I can't do this. I can't marry someone who sees me as a solution to her problems instead of a person she loves." "Marcus, please. I do love you. Maybe you do, in your way. But love isn't enough when it's built on deception." He walked to the kitchen and returned with a small velvet box, the engagement ring. He set it on the coffee table between them. "I'm sorry, Avalon, but this is over." Avalon stared at the ring for a long moment, then looked at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. "This is all your fault. If you'd just stayed quiet, stayed in your place." "My place," I repeated thoughtfully. "You know what I learned in Japan, Avalon? I learned that a person's place isn't determined by other people's expectations. It's determined by their own character, their own choices, their own strength." I stood up, smoothing down my suit jacket. "You chose to build your life on manipulation and lies. I chose to build mine on hard work and genuine love. That's the difference between us." Marcus walked me to the door, his face etched with guilt and regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry. For everything I said, everything I asked you to change about yourself. I had no idea. You couldn't have known. I never told you. But I should have trusted you. I should have seen what she was doing." I cupped his face in my hands, the way I used to when he was little and needed comfort. "You trusted someone you loved. That's not a character flaw, Marcus. It just means you need to be more careful about who deserves that trust. Can you forgive me?" "There's nothing to forgive. You're my son, and I love you." That never changed, even when things were difficult between us. 6 months later, I sat in the window of a small cafe in downtown Tokyo, watching the morning rush hour crowd navigate the busy streets. Steam rose from my teacup, and I smiled at the familiar chaos of the city that had once been my home. Takeshi Yamamoto had been serious about his job offer. When I'd called him a month after the engagement party ended, he'd been delighted to discuss the possibility of my return to consulting work. The international market had indeed become more complex, and my unique combination of cultural knowledge and business experience was exactly what Yamamoto Industries needed. I wasn't the same woman who had left Tokyo 23 years ago, devastated by grief and focused solely on giving her son stability. I was someone new, someone who had learned to value herself again, who understood that she could be both a devoted mother and a successful professional. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. He was doing well, focusing on his career and taking time to figure out what he really wanted in a relationship. We talked every week now, honest conversations where he asked about my new life, and I shared stories about the work that had once defined me. "I'm proud of you, Mom," his latest message read, "for standing up for yourself, for showing me what real strength looks like." I typed back, "I'm proud of you too, for choosing truth over convenience." Another message came through, this one from an unexpected source. It was from Miyuki Tanaka, Kenneth's wife. "I wanted you to know that we're getting divorced. I finally understand what you meant about building relationships on truth instead of appearances. Thank you for opening my eyes." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some people learned from their mistakes, others simply repeated them with different players. I hoped Miyuki was in the first category, but her journey was no longer my concern. That evening, I walked through the Ginza district, my heels clicking on the polished sidewalks as I made my way to dinner with potential clients. I was wearing a tailored dress that cost more than I used to make in a month at the library, but more importantly, I was wearing confidence that came from knowing exactly who I was. A woman approached me near the restaurant, speaking rapid Japanese as she asked for directions. I responded fluently, and she bowed gratefully before hurrying away. The interaction reminded me of something Hiroshi had once told me during our early days together. "The most powerful people," he'd said, "are those who can move easily between different worlds without losing themselves in any of them." I'd spent years hiding in one small world, making myself smaller to accommodate other people's expectations. But I wasn't hiding anymore. As I entered the restaurant where my clients waited, I thought about Avalon and the lesson she'd learned too late. She'd tried to build her life by diminishing others, by making people feel less than they were so she could feel superior. But true power didn't come from making others small. It came from knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. I'd finally remembered that lesson, and I was never going to forget it again. The maitre d' bowed politely as he led me to my table. "Right this way, Nakamura-san. Your guests are already seated and very much looking forward to meeting you." I smiled and followed him through the elegant dining room, past tables full of powerful people conducting business in multiple languages. This was my world again, not because I'd been born into it, but because I'd earned my place in it. And this time, I was never letting anyone take that away from me. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.